My name is Morgan Williams, and I identify as a Black woman, descendant of North American slaves.
My name is David Vassar. I self-identify as Black because of my father's side and Mexican for my mother.
My name is Ayodele Abejide. I'm a Black male, Black Nigerian male.
My name is Lisa Vasquez, and I'm Puerto Rican.
Hi, my name is Anastasia DeMeo, and I'm biracial. My dad's Black and my mom is white.
My name is Nicole Tawolde, and I self-identify as a Black woman with a mixed identity, a mixed ethnic identity.
My name is Adam Justin Tung, and I self-identify as half Nicaraguan, half Antiguan, but I understand within America, I'm a Black man.
All my life, I've had friends from different nationalities, and they have always been able to say, oh, I'm Polish, Albanian, Ghanaian, Nigerian, and every time I'm in that conversation, I always feel like, where do I say I'm from other than this country? Being a dark-skinned Black woman, I get from a lot of West Africans, hey, where are you from? And I always respond with, well, I'm from Michigan. And they're like, no, like, where are you really from? And I think, the history of my ancestors died on the plantations that my family descended from in Alabama and Mississippi.
Growing up in New York, where we lived in New York, I was part of the majority. I went to pretty much all Black elementary school, middle school, and part of high school. There was a Latin community there as well, but pretty much everybody looked like me. But moving from New York to South Florida was literally a night and day difference. I went from being part of the majority to being a minority, be it in a Black to white ratio, but also social status. I think my parents, they worked hard. Let's say we were solid middle class. I moved to an area where middle class is on the lower end of the spectrum, so it's upper middle class, and then just outright rich people. Kids are driving BMW like 3 Series to school while I brought my Huffy bike down from New York thinking I was a big kid now.
Growing up in Nigeria, everyone is like mostly Black, or like over 90% of the population is Black. So being Black didn't feel different, like it felt normal. Coming to US, like I had to now be very cautious about a subject that I didn't think about when I was growing up in Nigeria, and race.
Growing up as a mixed race person was very interesting. I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, so always was reminded that I was different just because of my surroundings. But I think the other interesting side of growing up as a mixed race person was the internal family battles, right? So, oh, you're speaking a certain way, so you're trying to choose one of the races over the others, or you're not Black enough, or you're not Mexican enough because you don't speak fluent Spanish. There was always something that was a reminder of that I was different and not necessarily accepted by either until I got older, and then when you start proving yourself as being successful and ambitious, then next thing you know, both sides are trying to claim you.
Being both Eritrean on my dad's side and Jamaican on my mother's side, I always had this feeling that I didn't necessarily fit in with one culture. My family would, on my Jamaican side, they would speak in patois, and there was this like immediate, understanding of like what it was to be Jamaican, and I never felt like I really had that. Same with my Eritrean family. I would have cousins who both of their parents were Eritrean as well, and they would speak some Tigrinya. They would speak, they would have the clothing, and they would go to weddings all the time, and I just didn't have the same experience. So I always felt like I wasn't enough of either culture. And when people would ask me like, well, tell us something in Tigrinya, tell us something in patois or whatever, I felt like I was never satisfying what people wanted to hear, wanted to know about my cultures or my identity. It just felt like I was lacking.
So a lot of the pressures from society comes from how other people view us. So as one of 4 siblings, as like biracial people, we all look a little bit different, and some of our features may look more black, or some of our features may look more white. Like, for example, my hair is fair and wavy like my mom's, but some of my other sisters have like really coarse curly hair, but my features represent my grandma way more. So it's really interesting trying to like strike that balance. You get a lot of conversations like, what are you? And it's a very weird way to talk to people to start it off, but a lot of people will come up with that question, and based on their answers or based on their preconceived notions of like what I am, whether that be correct or incorrect, definitely influences how they treat me and how I know that they treat like the rest of my family. So a lot of my life has been trying to balance out figuring out how I am, what I personally am, what my family represents, and not letting other people get involved and put their opinions and influences of what I should be like on me.
Being Puerto Rican generally means that you have West African, Spanish, and Taino Indian ancestry. And I identify as Puerto Rican purposely because I want people to know that I'm mixed race. I'm proud of the island I come from and its history. Having the physical traits that I have definitely impacted my character and experience in life. Growing up in Humboldt Park, Chicago in the 90s, my elementary school was predominantly Black, Mexican, and Puerto Rican children. And in that neighborhood, I stood out because I could pass as European. And I was definitely teased a lot. I mean, from cousins who would call me white girl, to classmates who would like to point out that I wasn't as curvy as other girls my age to put me down. I'm constantly let known that I don't look Latina enough.
In 2007, the state of Michigan got rid of affirmative action. That was my senior year of high school. And also that year, I worked at Hollister. And working at Hollister, I was the only Black person there. And all of my coworkers and I were just all talking about the universities we were going to attend in the fall. And everyone was naming their universities. They were saying, I'm going to Western Michigan, Central Michigan, Wayne State. And when it was my turn, I said I was going to the University of Michigan. And one of the guys said, oh, I'm so glad affirmative action is like no longer a thing. And I thought to myself, was I not good enough? Did my merit, did that not get me into the University of Michigan? And so I was really disappointed in that moment, mainly because this gentleman hadn't worked with me in that capacity. He didn't know my intellect, but to assume that I only got in based on my race just was really disappointing for me.
It's rough. My skin is weaponized. My assumptions are made about me without any input from me. I always need to wonder if my interactions are based on my output or if somebody's previous ideas of me. So it makes for a difficult time not knowing where I stand in society.
My career of choice, being a software engineer, means that like race becomes like a very important subject for me to be aware of, because the discipline itself is like visibly white. Like it's predominantly dominated by white males, and when I go to conferences, I would like usually be like either the only, like I've been at a conference where I was the only Black person there, and or I can like uncount like a number of Black people, which feels like so weird, and it's so weird and like feels very different. Like it's something I had to mentally think about. That like, oh yeah, looking around, I'm not just like I'm different here and things like that.
In high school, right before I was going to go to college, I was actually leaving a friend's house, probably around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and I had a spotlight put on me as I was walking to my car to leave. And I was asked, do I know where I am? And I was in a rich, white neighborhood at the time, and I guess there was a burglary that happened nearby, and they decided that I needed to be questioned, right? When clearly I had no involvement with anything that had happened. And the only thing that had saved me from this situation, because I did have a gun pointed at me, was the fact that I was an athlete, and I was actually in the newspaper the week before.
I have Afro-Latino cousins who are often told that they're not Latino enough because their physical traits are too Black. And so we're told, you know, you're not Latino, you're black. You're not Latina, you're white. And it took a lot of self-love to be able to raise above those comments that try to put me down. And being aware of that, I try to uplift other people who are marginalized when I can. With that said, it's important to say Afro-Latinos are Latinos. We are one.
For me, it was like a very weird conversation when it comes to extended family of my husband, because like for me, his parents knew me for a very long time. They've met my parents. They obviously know I'm biracial, but when you're meeting people for the first time, especially extended family, people you don't know, it was this very weird feeling of having to like tell them my whole background, which is like very strange because you would expect people to want to take you at face value, but there was this very strong feeling of like, I need to let them know my heritage, my background, and I'm proud of it and I want them to know about it. And then also kind of this weird feeling of like having to represent a whole group of people, and that in combination with being biracial and not being like very obviously like black in any like way, it's really difficult, and it was like a very intense experience for me, and probably one of the biggest things that shaped my experience as an adult, and understanding like what I am and what my cultures represent, and how to deal with other people.
At this point, I feel much more comfortable in discussing my background. It's a source of pride for me, something that I can attach to, and I feel some sort of understanding and about who I am and where I come from. I get frustrated sometimes when there's assumptions that I know everything about my culture. Like, people ask me about some sort of historical event or an opinion about something that's going on with a Jamaican celebrity or whatever. It's like, oh, well, you speak for all Jamaicans, right? You know what this is. I'm like, no, I can't really speak for everyone. There's so much different opinions. Just because of you're from one culture doesn't mean that you can represent how everyone in that culture feels about whatever scenario. But generally, I feel really good about talking about it as long as it's not in the wrong lens. If it's an open conversation, an opportunity to just learn more about who I am and where my parents come from.
So growing up, my father always told me I was a double negative. I was a woman and I was black. That means I need to work twice as hard as the hardest working white man. And if I am achieving at those optimal levels, then people would only see my achievements as good as the average white man. And, you know, growing up, I didn't really get it, I think, until probably college and being in the workforce and realizing that it's necessary to work twice as hard. And in doing so, a lot of people would say that I seem really competitive or you know, very goal-oriented, and it's really because of knowing that you know, mentality that my father taught me as a young child.
So when I grew up, I had a lot of stories. My father grew up in Mobile, Alabama. He was born in Selma, Alabama, and when he was 17, he was sent up to Chicago because of all of the racial issues at the time. I'll give his age away because he was born in 1941. So you can kind of imagine some of the things that he lived through in the South and then also in Chicago. I'm lucky to be alive today from some of the stories that I was told, because there was a lot of racial violence that was occurring when my father was younger. And on my mother's side, being Mexican, there was a lot of issues too, in terms of just being looked down upon, belittled all the time, being reminded that she was different. But I like to think that those are the things that made us the way we are today in terms of being very strong. I have a brother here at Braintree as well. I'm sure you can kind of see that in him as well.
For me, me and my family do a lot of like playing both sides of that aisle, trying to figure out how to explain to people like what our experiences are and what our culture is, and defining blackness, what it means to us and our family. For my dad, for him, it's really important, the historical side and like the family side. So he did a lot of research and did a lot of work uncovering our family tree. which was actually really difficult because, like, as an African American man, you know, slavery really wiped out a lot of that historical record, but he really did his best to try to piece it all back together and then really involve us as a family, like learning like our history from his side of the family along with my mom's, and kind of blending that into like one familial unit that is uniquely for us.
My hair has always been a contention for me. Growing up, I had straightened my hair. I would straighten it with permanent straighteners, temporary straighteners, texturizers. I always had it straight, and to the point where I didn't feel comfortable with my own hair being natural. I didn't think I would be pretty enough or fit in if I didn't straighten my hair. And in college, I had this one project, and we had to be consultants for Target, and we had to look and see how Target tried to cater to Asians and Black people. And from an Asian standpoint, I've noticed that Target had a lot of foods for that community. And for Black people, the target was hair care products. And I noticed that all the hair care products were straightening products, and they were also fine tooth combs that couldn't go through my natural hair. And I thought, wow, the world of commerce is not made for me as my natural self. And so when I graduated, I cut my hair off and had a little tiny fro. And I remember my father saying, "Oh my God, like, why would you do that?" And I already had a job offer upon graduating. So he was like, "They're gonna take your job away from you. This is a terrible mistake." And you know, my father grew up in the segregated South in the 60s, where it was just a very different time for him, and he experienced a lot of racial injustice. So he was just kind of looking out and trying to protect me. So I started that job, kept the job. They did not fire me because of my hair, but I did have one coworker who said, "Don't you think if you straighten your hair, it'd look a little bit more professional?" And I thought, the hair growing out of my head in a cute little cut, that's not professional enough. And so now, you know, I wear my hair in multiple different styles. I haven't straightened my hair for 7 years, and I feel so free. You know, back then I couldn't sweat. I couldn't go to the gym, couldn't go swimming. I'd be afraid of rain, humidity, all those things where I was a prisoner to my hair. And now it's just such a freeing feeling being able to be completely me.
Becoming more comfortable about expressing cultures came with being comfortable about not having to satisfy anyone, not feeling like I needed to check off some sort of box and like, these are the ways that you're Jamaican. It's if you speak in this way, if you lived on the island or whatever. I attached that identity to. Once I decided I was going to make it my own, I was going to be both and not just one or the other. I was going to be like all the components of my cultures rather than trying to pick one. I feel like there's always this desire to place someone in a box, and I really wanted to do that. I wanted to make it simple. When I was a kid, I would say, "Oh, I'm Jamaican," or "I'm Ethiopian." I just made it very easy for people because I thought that that's what people wanted. And eventually it just didn't work for me because that's not who I was. I wasn't one or the other. So I've become more comfortable with making it more complex and not just something that makes it easy for other people to understand.
I get strength from being Black and Mexican through the beauty of both cultures. I really very much enjoy a lot of the music on both sides. Right? The food and the values are very similar in terms of family being one of the most important things.
I feel like I carry my African ancestry and my love and connection to music. Give me a Latin, African, Caribbean beat, and I'm ready.
Saturday mornings were great in retrospect, but then not so much. It was get up, watch cartoons. My mother and dad would open up all the windows. They'd put on some sort of reggae or soca. We'd clean the house because that's a very West Indian thing to do. And then my mom would start making either nakatamales or we'd go out and get like Caribbean roti for dinner.
Like, it's interesting that like there have been conversations around like subjects like this, which though it feels very uncomfortable even for me to like talk about it, but then it's good that like the community and everyone in general seems to be getting cautious about it and trying to like do something about this, because like population distribution of people in IT in general does not align with like what the society is like, does not align with like the distribution of population in society, which is like disturbing. But it's interesting to like see that people are beginning to take steps like with diversity, regards diversity, and trying to like make IT in general more diverse, which I think is promising, and at least would make me feel more home in IT in the US.